Good morning and welcome to the Building Relationships with Disabilities Communities Workshop presented by the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium. My name is Luis Mendoza and I'm a member of the Consortium Steering Committee, and this morning I will be serving as your host. As a visual description of myself, I'm a Latino male. I have black hair, a gray beard, and I wear glasses. And this morning I'm wearing a blue V-neck pullover sweater over a brown t-shirt. Behind me, I'm coming from my home office, and behind me you'll see another computer workstation, as well as some colorful feathered Mardi Gras masks on the back wall. Next slide. As we begin the workshop, we'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and that we occupy this land. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land we are on. Next slide. We'd also like to offer these shared agreements. One, that this is a safe space. We respect all efforts to work on accessibility issues in your organization. The fact that you are here is a big deal. We recognize that each organization is at varying levels of accomplishment with accessibility, and we are here to help and not to judge. And finally, we are diligent in studying and researching our resources and are interested in learning about those we may have missed. Next slide. We'd like to thank the sponsors for today's workshop. That would be the Wing Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience, Group Health Foundation, and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Next slide. By way of an overview of how we'll be spending our time, in a few moments, I'll be introducing, you'll get an introduction to the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium by Elizabeth Ralston, our founder, which will be followed by Act 1 of our workshop, where the moderator will ask questions to the panelists. Then we'll have a short 2-minute intermission. And in Act 2, our panelists will respond to questions posed by the audience. And in Act 3, we'll wrap up and close. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Ralston, the founder of the consortium. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Louis. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third and final workshop of the year. Can you believe it? It's already November. So excited to see so many of you here. And while I'm talking, please introduce yourselves. Where are you coming from? What organization are you with? So that we know who's on the call. That would be great. I wanted to say a few words about myself. I am a white woman with short wavy silver hair, and I'm wearing a maroon blouse with a matching sweater and wearing gold hoops, which you probably can't see because of the virtual background that I have. And I have a virtual background with a blue background, and the words workshop. I can't even read it. Consortium workshop in one corner, and then the consortium logo in the other corner. So welcome to the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium workshop. Our mission is to connect arts and cultural organizations with information and resources to improve accessibility for people of all abilities. And we work really hard to bring information to everyone, including people from nonprofits and anyone who is interested in integrating accessibility within their programs, events, and spaces. We're fiscally sponsored by Sunpike, and we have a great steering committee, and I want to give a shout out to the steering committee members on this call who are helping to make this happen. It's a wonderful team, and without all of these great people, this would not happen. Next slide, please. Thank you to everyone who made a donation thus far. We ask that you consider making a donation to support our mission and future workshops. Together, we can increase accessibility. And Amberly is going to put in the chat the donation link is bit.ly/SCSC Sunpike. So please take a moment to donate. Every little bit goes a long way, and we really appreciate your support. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the goals of the workshop. We really want to learn how organizations have worked on building relationships with disability communities. We want to gain new ideas and strategies for reaching out and engaging disability communities. And this is so important because with the pandemic, we've had to really rethink the business model in the arts sector. How are we going to attract new audiences into our spaces? And these new audiences can be people with disabilities and seniors, because we have an aging population. We have to be thinking about ways to bring these people in, people who have not generally attended programs and events in the past. So how do we build those relationships with this critical consumer base? Because people with disabilities are a very underutilized member of our economy. Billions of dollars can be spent with this group. So next slide. So with that, I want to introduce our amazing moderator, Karen Braitmayer. She is the founder and managing principal of Studio Pacifica, an accessibility consulting firm in Seattle, which advises clients on creating spaces that serve the unique needs of individual users while complying with federal laws and state codes. Karen is an architect and a wheelchair user with a professional focus on accessibility and advocacy. Her efforts fill an important gap in the evolving inclusion conversation. Karen was admitted to the prestigious College of Fellows by the American Institute of Architects, and in 2010 was appointed by President Barack Obama to the United States Access Board. She was named 2019 Person of the Year by New Mobility magazine and awarded the 2019 Whitney M. Young Jr. Award by the American Institute of Architects in recognition of her leadership in civil rights for people with disabilities, social sustainability, public policy, and universal design. And it's my great honor to present to you Karen, who will be moderating this session with our 4 great panelists. And please continue to introduce yourselves. Put your comments in the chat. There's a wealth of experience here. We'd love to hear from you. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. Karen, welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth, so very much. My name is Karen Braitmayer. I'm coming to you today from my office in Seattle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a middle-aged white woman with short cropped brown hair, rimless glasses. I'm wearing a silver gray top, and behind me there is a very bold orange wall hanging, which sort of looks like the phases of the moon. I've been watching the names and organizations flying by on the chat, and I'm completely blown away by the range of people who have come to see us today. You know, from Maine and Colorado and Pennsylvania and beyond. So thank you all for being with us today, and continue to put your names and locations and organizations in the chat. It really helps us kind of get a community together. So today I'm going to introduce our panelists. Next slide, please. Our first panelist is Jay Kim. Jay is an information and resource coordinator at the ARC of King County. As a social worker who has a developmental disability, she believes these services are critical, including education, housing, employment, and many others. Jay believes that social services are a basic need to which all people should have access. This is also why she wanted to study social work, to advocate for people with disabilities and support them to lead their very best successful life. She wants to help them find their voice because they are the ones that face the challenges and they know that they need to be successful. Great, next slide. Our next panelist is John Orr. John is the Executive Director of Artreach, an innovative leader in accessible arts programming in Philadelphia, another Pennsylvania person. He has served as president of the Museum Council of Greater Philadelphia, and he has worked at large museums, small community art centers, and international research institutions. He connects with the disability community and the cultural sector through his work on the Mayor's Commission on People with Disabilities, the board of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, and the board of the Philadelphia Cultural Fund. Orr identifies as neurodiverse and lives in South Philadelphia with his partner, Allison, 11-year-old daughter, Maddie, and 2 gray cats who hold deep disdain for each other. Wow, what a household. Next slide, please. Our third panelist is Danielle Miller. Danielle has been the director and regional librarian for the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, a program of the Washington State Library, and a regional library for the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, a part of the Library of Congress since 2008. Miller earned her Master of Library and Information Science from the University of Washington iSchool, which is their information school. She is the Washington Library Association board president and secretary for the Libraries Serving Persons with Print Disabilities Standing Committee of the International Federation of Library Associations and Organizations. Really looking forward to hearing more about that. And on to our fourth panelist. Ariel Bello has held the position of Director of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services at the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center since 2002. She received her Bachelor of Science in Leisure Studies and Recreation from California State University and a contract management certificate from the University of Washington. Since joining HSDC, she has graduated from Project LEAD, which stands for Leadership, Effectiveness, and Diversity, a United Way of King County program which aims to increase the representation of people of color on nonprofit boards and in other positions of community leadership in King County. And now I invite the panelists to turn their cameras on. And as as everyone's joining us, we're gonna have a great conversation. I'm really excited about hearing from the panelists. But first, I have a message for our audience. So we're gonna talk today about building relationships with the disability community, and we're gonna hear from these very powerful speakers. But I acknowledge that you all in the audience have also had experiences doing this. So as we talk to the panelists today, I want you to think, what have you done to build relationships within the disability community or engaged with people with disabilities? And what strategies have worked for you? And I really encourage you to put that information in the chat, and we'll have opportunities to kind of read some of those aloud today in the middle of our conversation with the panelists. So I'm gonna start with the first question. And as each panelist comes forward, I hope you will share a description of yourself for our audience. So our first question today is, what strategies are you or your organization using to build relationships with disability communities? And I'm just going to start with who's on the screen here. So for me, Danielle is the first one up. So Danielle, would you be happy to share an answer to that question?
Sure. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Danielle Miller, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am a fair-skinned white woman with shoulder-length, wavy brown hair and blue eyes and black-rimmed glasses. I have on a white collared shirt with a black sweater. And I'm in my office at the library with a slightly messy desk behind me, I'm afraid, and some plants on a window ledge. And for us, we do a lot of work doing outreach to our current library patrons, who include anyone with any sort of print disability. And we do that through many channels of by mail newsletter, social media platforms, an email listserv, and through an outreach librarian going out in the community, going to as many events with the blind consumer groups, the Washington Council of the Blind, the National Federation of the Blind, Blinded Veterans of America. We also try and do a lot of connections in the community, working with the Department of Services for the Blind, the Washington State School for the Blind, trying to connect with other disability organizations, connecting with groups who work with people with traumatic brain injuries, with physical disabilities, with reading disabilities. In terms of art organizations, we've collaborated with the Jack Straw Cultural Organization. There's an organization called Vision Loss Connections that we've worked with, and they've connected somewhat doing the described tours at the Seattle Art Museum, and other things like that. And we really just try and get out in the community as much as we can. We're always trying to get to events and connect with people and connect them with our library services, trying to make information and reading materials as available as possible and facilitate that access to information and opening up doors to reading.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question? And that would be, how do you find the organizations that you are looking for, or that you would like to engage with, or new organizations?
That's a great question. I try asking people where they've heard about us, talk to low vision providers, independent living providers, see who they're working with, doing any networking. We had been doing some outreach to the Hispanic and Latino community, looking at those organizations. Listening to other events. I go to webinars, see who's on them, look for names. I've been looking at the chat like you said you were, Karen, and going, wow, these are places I've got to reach out to. So really just kind of combing around, seeing where I might be able to make connections. And we definitely ask when we go to events where people heard about us, and look at other tables at events and see who's there, who might be a good connection for us.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to ask the same question, Ariel. What strategies are you or your organization using to build relationships with disability communities?
Okay, I'd like to introduce myself. I am a brown-skinned woman. She, her are my pronouns. I've got pinkish hair and it's growing out and I dyed it pink. Okay, I've got a blue top on. I'm in my work office with a solid colored background wall in order for people to be able to see me signing. It's a dark background. The color and the hue is green. I also have a plant on a filing cabinet here and a window to my right. So to answer the question for myself as well as the organization, in my bio, I'm also on the board of Deaf Spotlight, which is an arts organization. It's an art and cultural organization for deaf people here in the Seattle area. And I'm on the board of that as well. So I do a lot of my work for that organization as well as the organization for which I'm employed. How we build relationships with the deaf and hard of hearing community. Because the deaf community and the hard of hearing community are a little bit different, we have to think of approaches that satisfy each of those communities. And culture is a basis for those communities. Culture is where people come together. If they have similarities as in communication, meaning sign language, then that community of language is of deaf people that share the same language. So that's where we focus our attention for the deaf community. I'm following the interpreter and make sure that she is up to where I am before I continue. We go to different events instead of, let's say, not a news article or print so much, as well as events, because gathering, places of gathering is really important. The Deaf Club, Deaf sports events, Deaf Night Out is another one. So where ASL users tend to gather. There's a Trader Joe's up on Capitol Hill where people gather. We go to different places and that's how we meet the community and let them know what's happening within our service provision opportunities. Hard of hearing folks, there is a hard of hearing community and where people are using spoken English and may have some adaptive technology to help them, whether that's captioning or loop systems, in order for them to be able to comprehend one another better. They'll lip read, they may write, where the deaf community is a strong ASL oriented community, and the focus is on accessibility to English in the mainstream community. But people tend to want to gather and share their own language and communicate with one another in ASL. So I think that's it for right now. I'll hand it back to you, Karen.
Great, thank you so much. So let's move on to our next panelist. Jay, if you're able to answer the question, what strategies are you or your organization using to build relationships with disability communities?
Hi everyone, I'm Jay, an Asian woman. I am wearing a shirt and have long black hair tied in back. Behind of me is a virtual background of a pink room. For our work, we train a lot of places, including museums, where we talk about how to treat people with disabilities. We support their staff to think about disability so that they can apply it to their work. Now, many art organizations offer sensory-free or inclusion hours, which is a positive change. As a person with a disability and a professional, I'm so grateful to see those improvements. However, there is still a need for improvements because everyone needs different things and disability never ends.
Great, thank you, Jay. And now we're going to hear from our last panelist, John. What strategies are you or your organization using to build relationships with disability communities? Welcome.
Thanks, Karen. My name is John Orr. I'm a white male in my 40s. I have sort of salt and pepper hair that will go in different directions throughout this presentation. I'm wearing a gray sweater over a black shirt that has what looks like little white polka dots, but they're actually tiny little elephants. I don't know why I decided to do that today. And in the background, there's a bunch of art, mostly abstract art in the background against white walls. So Outreach we've been building relationships with communities since we were founded in '86. We have a network of about 185 human service agencies that we work with that serve people with disabilities or people experiencing poverty. And then we have a bunch of partners, about 220 partners in the arts in Greater Philadelphia. And what we do is we take feedback from the disability community through the human service networks and through some other public areas. And we leverage it to make change happen at the arts organizations that we partner with. One of the most effective strategies that we have to engage the disability community is it's really simple. It's just very authentic conversations about what the community wants. And instead of taking feedback that the burden of feedback that we've placed on people and trying to sort of shoehorn it into a program that doesn't work for them, we do this really wild thing. We just do what they tell us to do. And so because of that, we've built a lot of trust up within the community. We've produced a lot of really good results, and me and my team have been welcomed into a lot of different areas where we can work with the disability community through either Disability Pride Pennsylvania, our work with the Mayor's Commission or the State Developmental Disabilities Council, and then of course the big group of human service agencies that we just show up to and kind of hang out with and have real conversations with throughout the year. So I'll stop there and then we can move on. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, John. You said a couple of things that resonated with me, and I think through all of the panelists. One is that you strive to take the burden of the engagement off the disability community by really listening to what they say. And then it seemed like everybody here is saying, one of the most powerful ways to engage is to actually get together, be in the same place. Ariel mentions that it's important to be together physically because you want to be able to communicate, and that's a big part of the deaf culture, and I would argue even the hard of hearing culture, and that people really want to have authentic experiences. Our next question is, and I'll address this to different panelists now, but what efforts, if any, do you see from arts and culture community to communicate or engage with the disability community? And which ones are effective or perhaps not so effective? John, you touched on that. Would you like to maybe expand a little bit? I'll have you start.
Sure. So I think in our partnership base, we have so many partners. So there's a lot of different people at different levels of their sort of journey towards equity and inclusion. I think what's what's been interesting, I'll say interesting and frustrating at the same time, is that we get a lot of buy-in and a lot of enthusiasm on accessible programming from sort of the front line of folks at the cultural organizations, but we don't always see it embedded at the leadership levels and the board levels. So there's not, like, the inclusion efforts are never necessarily tied to the strategic direction of the organization. And so for us, that's been a, like, trying to change that dynamic has been a big part of our work. But what I see on the ground is just, it's unreal. I think, in Philadelphia, we have the largest proportional disability community of any major city in the country. We also have the largest proportional group of people living in poverty. And so there's a lot of intersectional oppression that people are feeling all over Philadelphia. And it's trying to address all of those issues. But I think that the cultural community in Philadelphia has certainly moved from what felt like years and years and years of just talking about the problem to starting to implement actual change that's producing measurable results, so that we can tell who's doing the work in a way that's effective and who needs to step back and reevaluate their approach, so that we can sort of advance inclusive accessibility a little bit quicker.
This is Karen. So John, are you advocating then for example, people with disabilities on arts and culture boards?
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, Outreach just did our strategic plan for the next 4 years, and one of the things we want to focus on is leadership cohorts for the disability community that start placing people at the board level and preparing people for leadership in the arts. And I think, as someone who's worked in the arts my entire life, I feel a little bit bad because I know what the arts generally pay, but I also know that we're not going to get the change that we want on a systemic level until we start putting people at the table at higher levels throughout organizations. Because I can be an advocate all day long, and I can be a squeaky wheel and whatever, but me and my team, we're one little organization. We need more people at more tables.
Thank you. Ariel, I know you mentioned that you are on a board. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what efforts you've seen from arts and culture communities to communicate or engage with the disability community, and what effective strategies you might have seen.
Yes. For example, I can thank my mother. She taught me a lot about art and art culture. And so I had a family member who was here in the Pacific Northwest Ballet. So having family members in the arts community gave me early exposure. At the same time, being a deaf person trying to attend these types of events, I was faced with the inability to access them. And now I have to think about, what year was that? When did that start? Like 1984, 1994, something like that. But I've seen over the years accessibility increase. So we're trying to do an effort within the deaf community to increase accessibility. So we have an accessibility committee that oversees how the stage could be set at a particular venue, where to place an interpreter, make sure that you look for the right interpreter, someone who's qualified and has theater experience. Not all sign language interpreters are savvy with performance interpreting. So you need to be able to get the appropriate interpreter that can interpret the music and the lyrics in a more artistic way that blends with the action and what's happening on the screen, as well as being appropriate for the deaf ASL audience. How that person takes on a character is unique. You may have a team of 2 interpreters and you may have 6 or 8 characters on the stage. So you assign a character to each interpreter. So they have to be able to shift their personality to match that character in order for the patrons to be able to follow. And one of the things that we do within the deaf community is to know previously who's going to take which character, so we can then better track the play in live action in order to reduce the amount of trying to guess what's happening. Similar with captioning, we're able to follow the captioning, but sometimes the captioning, the way it was placed, may be too small or off to the side and away from the main action on the stage. You may be asked to sit in a location that's not convenient to be able to see the action as well as reading the captioning. So if deaf and hard of hearing patrons need different types of accessibility to cultural events in order to be able to receive equitable accessibility. It can be frustrating because there's different degrees of effectiveness of these techniques that different art houses deploy. If people are open to receiving input from the local patrons or the interpreters, that helps. And there is a consulting group sometimes that I'm familiar with that's an outside of the Seattle area consulting group that comes in and to be able to help provide better accessible tips for a art house. And we've seen a lot of things improve over time with a consultant. And all of this is to avoid the upset or the inability to provide appropriate accessibility because it's not a lived experience for those that are producing the play, let's say. So that's some of the things that have happened here. Back to you.
Oh, got to turn that mute button off. This is Karen, and thank you. That was a great answer, Ariel. I'd like to turn to Jay and see what your thoughts are on how you see arts and culture organizations communicate with or engage with the disability community, and whether or not you've seen effective strategies.
Sometimes I see artworks that have people with disabilities in them, and I think it is a positive start to bring awareness of our community. I am thankful for this. However, some images are based on more land inspirational model, which is saying disability is a bad thing and people with disabilities cannot achieve anything in their lives. Those models say we don't want to have a disability because it is horrible. I know artists mean in a good way, but those images give a negative message to people about disability. We tend to have biases and low expectations for people with disabilities, which increases isolation and separation instead of supporting them. We think people with disabilities are different than us. They are not able to do anything. It is like us versus them, and we separate them from our community. I would love to see those artworks would approach an empowerment model so that it gives people an idea that disability is a natural thing.
That's a great message, Jay, that it really is about all of us, right? Whether if you don't have a disability right now, chances are you will acquire one through injury or through the natural aging process. So really what we're talking about is finding ways to bring like everybody into community and give them that opportunity to participate. And boy, we know how important the arts are in terms of giving us a richer life. Danielle, I'll turn to you for our next, for your answer to that question as well.
Sure. Thank you, Karen. This is Danielle. So we've focused a lot at the library on engaging our patrons in their ability to produce art. So that's, I guess, a little bit of a different approach by holding patron art shows and poetry exhibitions. So that's one thing that we've done. In terms of art organizations, we've had a lot of collaboration with Jack Straw, and they've reached out to us a lot, and we've had our youth patrons record stories with them, and we've collaborated on programming that way. And things that I've been aware of through some of the blindness organizations are the described tours at the Seattle Art Museum or audio description at Fifth Avenue and things like that. And I know those are good options. I would love to hear more of what people are doing and have groups reach out to me, and I think I need to reach out more to find out what I can share with our patron base to make programming more accessible and let people know about what's happening in the community, because I'm not always aware of things that might be available and might be more accessible to people who have blindness or low vision that they could engage in. That's one of the reasons we try and offer some opportunities for people to create art and explore that themselves so that it is tactile and it is something they can engage in themselves, because there may not be those opportunities out there. But if more and more are made available, I think that is a great opportunity.
Can I continue in conversation with you, Danielle? I'm going to sort of jump a little bit in the order of the questions that you guys were given, but I'd like to hear from you. What do you personally think that the goal of this kind of engagement should be? What should we be striving for?
That's a great question. I think opening up the world a little more so people have an opportunity to experience culture, experience art, self-exploration, the opportunity to try things, to explore, really, to have that opportunity to see and do and experience what anybody else can, to participate fully if they're interested. I mean, I know I've talked to a bunch of people who say, I don't care about art. And so you can't assume that even if it's accessible, everybody will want to, but to make that available, to make available what is available to anybody else to participate in by creating or participate in by experiencing and having access, whether it's visual art or musical theater or ballet, whatever it might be, that somebody has that opportunity that anybody else has and has it in a way that is accessible to them.
Great, thank you so much, Danielle. Let's see. John, I'll bounce that same question to you. What do you think that the goal of engagement with people with disabilities should be?
So I would, I just want people to be able to bring their full selves into a moment and just have that sort of individual sort of moment to experience the arts. I think for me, the goal for inclusion is not necessarily that we need to be in this inclusive mindset. We need to actually be in what I would say is like an anti-exclusive mindset. You know, we don't, when we talk to organizations, we're not just trying to tell them like, you need to widen your circle so that you're capturing the disability community in your audience. You need to look at what was in your circle to start with, understand what was keeping that audience out in the first place, and then you need to get rid of it so that your circle can expand in a really thoughtful and meaningful way. This idea that arts organizations have had for years of, why doesn't this community engage with us, and us being, performing arts, museums, whatever, has been placing the blame on the community for so long. And the reality is there's nothing wrong with the community. There's nothing to blame them for, right? They're human beings. And so what I want to see is I want to see arts organizations shift that question, right? It's not, why won't this community engage with us? It's like, what's wrong with us that's keeping this community out? And what are we going to do about that problem that we actually have agency over in order to authentically engage a community that deserves to have engagement because of their human rights to experience the arts? And so that's what I want to see us kind of move toward. I love all of the DEI work. I love that everyone's like, we want to make our circles bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like, yeah, but get rid of all the shit that made your circle small in the first place and then get bigger. Because until you do that, no one's going to feel safe. No one's going to feel like they have a safe space to be themselves and to bring their individual self into an experience. So that's kind of what that's what I want.
This is Karen. That's a really rich answer. Thank you so much. Jay, do you have an idea of what the goal of engagement should be from your perspective?
The goal should be bringing people with disabilities onto the table. If you engage disability community, you would be more comfortable later around people with disabilities. I think that interacting with them is more useful than learning about disability in the books. Also, there are many different types of disability, and everyone has different needs. The challenge would be that you cannot meet all needs, and there would be always someone needing something else. However, the important thing is that you try at least.
This is Karen. Jay, I love that. I love the idea that it's about the trying and the expression that we are such a diverse community, right? The disability community, so diverse. Ariel, I'd love to hear your perspective on what should be the goal of engagement.
The goal from my perspective. The goal of engagement, I think, is to make people more aware of technology and how technology has progressed and changed. There's a lot of technology that can suit the community, and technology is always changing, especially like for hard of hearing community, the loop systems, listening devices. Some people prefer captioning, and some hard of hearing folks have different needs, as well as like the deaf blind community has different needs. They may need a tactile interpreter that's describing what they see tactily into their hands. There's protactile interpreting, which is the ability of a person to provide visual description physically on a person's body, their arms, their legs, the back, on their back. So we're in a process of changing, and to be inclusive of all, we need to embrace all of these different technology approaches and be on top of technology. And remember that everyone has a different background, a different educational background, economic background, different races and ethnicities, and they are able to enjoy things in the way they wish to because of technology. And right now we have a virtual interpreting situation. It's always nerve-wracking because you're having an interpreter beam in virtually, and you're trying to have events to be as inclusive as they possibly can be while trying to meet everyone's needs. So those things need to be married together in someone's approach in terms of answering the goal of what is engagement.
This is Karen. Thank you so much for that. You know, you remind us that I often, in my work as an architect and an accessibility consultant, we talk about public community engagement in terms of reaching out to, for example, the neighborhood that you're doing a project in, or the racial community that you're trying to serve. And often that engagement process does not recognize that there will be people with disabilities in that community, because you know what? We're everywhere. There are people with disabilities in every social group, socioeconomic community, race, ethnicity, you name it. And so we need to recognize that. And I know that's not just about arts and culture, it's about public engagement in general, is that we want to make it as accessible as possible. I don't know if there are any, I'm gonna just ask our tech support, are there any suggestions that I might have a minute to read before we take our break? So I have a comment here, which is that one recommendation for engagement is to be open and curious about people with disabilities. We're all human and we all seek to engage with you. And I'm just running through the chat here. So what I'd like to do is we'll go ahead and take our 2-minute break, and it'll give me a second to read through the chat and see what suggestions that other people are having, and then we'll open up to questions after the break. So thanks so much to all of our panelists, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
As we head into break, I want to say that there has been some really excellent information and conversations that are happening in the chat. And based on requests in the chat, we will be providing a saved copy of the chat to all the attendees. Also, I wanted to mention that we are committed to keeping our programs free, and that donations help us sustain this effort. And this slide provides, again, a link to where you can make a donation. And if you're curious, the suggested donation amount would be $20. So yes, let's please take a 2-minute break, and we'll see you shortly.
Hi, this is Karen speaking. I'm going to invite our panelists back. And I have been sort of trolling through the chat, and I want to read out a couple, not that they're the only ones. There are lots of really great, there's lots of great information in the chat, but just to allow some folks who might not be able to access the chat to learn from some other organizations as well. So from the PNB, which I think is the Pacific Northwest Ballet Community Education, they posted that they have historically focused on access and inclusion through community education programming in public schools through both inclusive and adaptive movement curriculum. This year, they are partnering with Sensory Access to offer a sensory-friendly Nutcracker performance and to develop more sensory accessible supports and information for all PNB performances. And then that person provides information, a link to the sensory-friendly Nutcracker performance. Hearing Loss of Washington writes, we have reached out to affiliate organizations such as HSDC, Seattle Commission for People with Disabilities, ARC, WashCap, and DRW. They've participated on committees and subcommittees and outreach events. They've written supportive letters to augment advocacy efforts of affiliate organizations. They've partnered with arts community to provide information and education, to provide cultural guidance for meeting the unique needs of individuals who have hearing loss, who rely on hearing assistive technology, such as hearing loops and visual support via captions or transcripts. And they have a bi-monthly digital newsletter, and the link is in the chat. And then lastly, this comment, I have seen great need for awareness training of the frontline ushers in particular. They need to participate in training classes and seminars. I've done volunteer ushering here in Olympia and frequently have needed to gently guide other ushers as they greet or seat attendees who may use, for example, a wheelchair for mobility. So those are some really interesting suggestions in the chat, and there's lots more. So let's see. We have some questions for the panelists from our audience. So our first question is, people often repeat saying that they repeat the saying, if you build it, they will come, which actually I've said many times myself. Do you think building it, for example, providing an accessible service is enough? I think that's a really interesting question. Ariel, can we start with you?
Yes, that is interesting. If you build it, will they come? What I've noticed is that does begin to happen. That the deaf community, for example, the Seattle Theater Group, it's a group, they have different theaters under SGT, Seattle STG. And we're noticing that people are going. They've set up a website with the dates and the times that they're providing captioning and ASL services. And if you need help, they will definitely assist you. So we're seeing that happen. Seattle Art Museum also, they've done training with us for the docents, and they've gotten a lot better. There's a couple of docents that are able to communicate directly with deaf people. And then Deaf Spotlight has been asked to host the ASL event using signing docents to explain the art that are in the art museum, Seattle Art Museum. And that's gotten a lot better, and more people are attending because it's there. We're seeing that because it's now, ASL is more representative of our community, and when people are providing ASL for direct communication with something like that, instead of through an interpreter, we're seeing people come out for it. But we hope that there's one group that will improve their service. I'm not going to mention who, but I'm hoping that this one group will get on board. We've been watching them for a while, and we're hoping that they get with the program.
This is Karen. So just as a follow-up, so Ariel, you're saying it's not only build it and they will come, but it's also like know before you go, meaning that by providing information in a public place, like on the website, that it gives people confidence that they can attend an event and that they will be able to participate. I think that's really interesting.
Yes, and you're right. It's two-prong approach. It's easier for us to share information if we're informed beforehand what's going to happen, as opposed to making plans after the fact. So if we know what's happening beforehand, like a date and a time, and then we can let the community know, and we'll know that the seats are limited because they can't reserve the whole audience for us. They have a limited number of seats for those specific dates, where we can then watch from a good position where we can see everything that's happening. We've seen tickets sold out because it's been advertised in advance and people know it's happening. And so now we're like, okay, this is posted. We got to get on it to get our tickets before the tickets are sold out. So we're encouraging folks to get the tickets well in advance and not wait till the last minute, because that's not anything that you can do anymore. You used to be able to, but no longer.
This is Karen. That's great to hear that there's that much community interest. Oh my gosh. Danielle, do you have oh dear, the question just disappeared.
If you make it accessible, will they come?
Yeah. I turned to read it again and it disappeared off the chat. But do you agree with that idea? If you build it, is that enough?
I think I would just follow up on what Ariel was saying, that I think you really need to promote it as well. I think letting people know about it and building that confidence. And I think being consistent with it. You can't just have it be accessible once. If you're going to have someone there to do ASL, they need to be there at each show, or make sure you're very clear about which shows that's available. But you don't want to just do it once and then not do it again, or not be clear about when it's available. So I think promoting it and consistency and follow through, and really making a commitment to it, I think is important.
That's great. Jay, do you have any feedback for us on that idea of if you build it, they will come? Is that a term that you think is good enough?
Karen, Jay had put her answer in the chat.
Oh, and let me read that. Thank you. So Jay writes, you can use universal design, which is the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. But everyone always needs different support, even if they have the same disability, and offer support to everyone, not just people with disabilities. Oh my gosh, I so agree with that last line, because I think that's the way that we all feel supported and included, is if we're not segregated to the people that are being asked about. Great point, Jay. John, can I toss the ball to you? How do you feel about that phrase? If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, I'm just gonna let my Philly fly for a little bit. I think if you build it, they will come is just a bullshit approach to accessibility. I think it depends on how you build it. If all of your accessible shows are going to be little kid shows and you're ignoring the fact that kids with adults grow up to be kids with kids with disabilities grow up to be adults with disabilities, you're not going to get community buy-in for very long. I think what Ariel said and what Danielle said and what Jay said, it's all, it's all how you prep audiences and how you engage them in a meaningful way. So if you prepare people beforehand and you're consistent with your offerings, that's awesome. If you can embed it into what you want to do as an organization strategically, rather than accessibility via the availability of grant funding because somebody cares, like that's where it gets iffy for me. For me, accessibility is not a grant funded requirement that places have to have. It's a requirement. Therefore, it should be part of your general operating support or general operations. And I don't know, I think I've just lost patience. It's been 31 years since the ADA passed. So, we can talk about, whether you should build it. I guess the question is more like, why haven't you built it yet? And what's taken so long? Because it's like way past time, and it's bullshit. No, if you have not done accessible programming for 30 years and you build something and no one shows up, you should not be surprised, because you ignored a community for 3 decades, despite federal law. So yeah, I think if you build something meaningfully and with authenticity, and it's not inspiration porny, and you engage the community beforehand, yeah, if you build that, then people might show up, and they might not. But if they don't, you better do it again, because eventually they will if you do it with some kind of integrity.
That's this is Karen, and that really resonates with me. It's 31 years since we passed the ADA, which is supposedly going to give us accessible buildings and facilities. And we know how far that's gotten. There's been some improvement, but certainly not complete. So we do have a long ways to go, and it is hard when you run into a building owner that has owned a building for 20 years and now says, "Oh, I need to make it accessible."
Yeah,
kind of hard to feel empathy there for them.
Yeah, I just want to throw this out there, because it's something that we've been talking about a lot in Philly, and it's, the ADA, 31 years old, we've covered that. A lot of people use this financial loophole that they can't afford to do it, therefore they don't have to abide by the law. And I want people to think about that, especially people at cultural organizations right now, to think about that. And I want you to apply it to any other civil rights law, right? Imagine if it was the 1964 civil rights law and there was a financial loophole that said, if you don't think you can afford to allow people of color to engage with your organization, and organizations actually took advantage of that, we would call them all racist, 100%. But yet, for some reason, it's okay to do to people with disabilities. And here's the thing, there was one person who tried to put a financial loophole into the 64 Civil Rights Act. And his name was George fucking Wallace. And nobody should be trying to reach and strive to be him, who was described as the most powerful racist in America at the time, when you're talking about accessibility on a human rights level. So yeah, that's the end of my ADA rant, sorry.
Okay, there's a little piece of me, this is Karen, who's applauding that comment. Because, and Ariel's got her thumb up, and I think Jay's got a huge smile on her face. I think she agrees with you too. And it's really interesting because the next question in the question and answer is, for all the panelists, what is your response to the lack of funding as being cited as a reason for no or low accessibility? So you just played right into that, John. I love that. So let's see, does anybody else have a comment they would like to make around that issue?
This is Danielle. I'd say with the funding thing, it's kind of like, if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to go out to eat. I mean, I think it should be built into your funding. It's something that you need to build into your budget and pay for.
Very succinct. Very succinct, Danielle. Ariel, do you have any feedback on that?
Yes, I am curious about that. I think John is right. And my concern is to make accommodations for each individual that's out there. A deaf-blind person needs 2 interpreters, possibly. Not just 1 for the audience, but 2 for that individual. And then if you've got 3 deaf-blind individuals that wish to attend, that's 6 interpreters you're paying for. Now there is vibration technology, and some people are wanting that. When they're listening to a concert, instead of listening to the lyrics, they want to feel the vibration or see the lights that equate to the sound. And if you're building in that type of technology cost for a particular group to be able to feel or see the music, then that's an increase to one's budget. And it's like, how do we provide those accommodations for each individual person's preferences? And how costly could that be for like 1 concert? So that's a question to throw out there.
This is Karen. Ariel, you bring up the real kind of boots on the ground issues of this topic, but I do feel that it's important for arts organizations to understand what it might really take and not be surprised by that and work that in to their budget. Jay has posted her answer to the question in the chat, and she suggests that the reason there might be this discrepancy in funding is that the folks in our government officials don't have disabilities, that if they did, that maybe have lived experience, they might have made different choices. So one more question, I'm just checking the time. Yes, we definitely have time for another question. So this question says, the ADA has been discussed. What do you think the next step in disability justice is? And Jay, I'll let you think about that and put your answer in the chat, even though I would love to talk to you first because I'm trying to go around the table. But I'm gonna jump over to John. Let's see if you have any ideas on the next step on disability justice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sooner we get people with disabilities seats at the table, or engage them in ways and listen to their input, we're going to start to see systemic change. I think, you know, the next phase for me is this movement away from the acuteness of our accessibility approach. Like, we get funding to do a sensory friendly show, or we get funding to have interpreters, or we get funding to do this and do that and whatever. That's great. It's like a first step, but I think Jay said it earlier, taking a universal design approach to the built environment, to the learning environment, and for someone to, for the love of everything, my kingdom, for the person who steps up and fills the gap in research and develops the universal design for public programming for unpredictable audiences. That to me is the next phase of all of this. It's like, you know, we have the ADA and that's great. But the ADA is a standard. It sets standards. And every single arts organization I've ever run into strives for excellence in their performances, in their exhibitions. They strive for excellence everywhere else, except for accessibility. They just strive for standard. And that's the piece that needs to shift for me. And the idea that, you know, the ADA for what it is great, but it's a civil rights law, right? It's a civil rights law that was struck with a pen. And if Texas has taught us anything, any law struck by pen can be undermined with another pen down the road. But human rights don't disappear. You get them when you're born, and they stay with you for life. And we need to start recognizing that accessibility is the issue. It's not disability. Disability isn't, that's not the problem. The problem is places that are not accessible, the environmental impact of, and how it intersects with diagnosis that creates the inability to experience something. That to me is the like issue we have to crack. And we have to take it from a human rights, social justice perspective. Otherwise, we're just, I don't know, we're spinning our wheels. We just got to get serious about it.
This is Karen. You said a couple of things that I think really resonate with me. You mentioned unpredictable audiences. And I definitely see that in my work, that spaces are designed for the expected individual who will come in the door. And that expected individual tends to be kind of at the top of the bell curve of like the most common. And some of us who come with mobility devices like me and hearing aids, or who, or you know, need communication access or whatever, we kind of fall outside of that bell curve. And then people go, oh, what do I do? And I think we need to find a way to help organizations like broaden their understanding of what an expected audience would be.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, I'll say real quickly, I'm excited to meet you on this panel because we're going to work together, I think, soon in Philadelphia on the Carousel House.
Oh, are you working on that?
So I'm the chair of the Recreation and Art Committee for the Mayor's Commission for People with Disabilities, but it brings up this idea, right? So like the Carousel House, which for anyone who's not from Philadelphia, it was a really amazingly accessible recreation center that they they're tearing down, but they're going to rebuild. And Karen's on the team to advise on that, but we're struggling with that same topic. It's like, we can rebuild this one amazing space, but why aren't we addressing the entire recreation system in Philadelphia? And why are the other 200 rec centers that are within proximity to where people live, why aren't they fully accessible yet? So there's this dual approach to how you solve the issue widely. And I don't know, we'll dive into that later.
Well, I think it brings up a really interesting issue, because one of the things that made this community center unique was that it had as I understand it, I've not been there, but it had a culture of supporting disability and a huge range of disability. And so today we've been talking about how does the arts and culture organizations reach out to the disability community, which I believe is its own culture. And so it's about culture talking to culture, or accepting and valuing each other's culture. Does that make sense? But I do want to give, so Jay has put her answer to the question in the chat. She says, to educate people about disability justice. The ADA is just a law, and people can support us a little, not to get sued. They don't support us to provide full access. Oh my goodness, I've definitely seen that. I'm so with you. And let's, oh gosh, we have so many really awesome questions I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to, but I would like to hear from Ariel and Danielle really quick about your thoughts on the next step on disability justice. Ariel, can you really quickly give us an answer to that?
Well, now I've noticed something that started in this past year in terms of next steps for disability justice is the BIPOC disability community. Most art organizations tend to be white, and they don't speak for us. So if you include BIPOC disabled people, we tend to be the most frustrated because we have oppression from our own disability, and we have oppression from our own color of our skin. And organizations tend to be run by white people. In order to make systemic change, we have to include us. So BIPOC people that are also disabled, I think, need to be included in part of the next steps that we're discussing here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. And Danielle, do you have a comment?
Sure. Well, I agree with everything that's been said so far, and I would just add accessible publishing. I think is an area that there's a lot of room to grow, and there's work being done there. And it might put me out of a job, but that would be a good thing to have happen if everything being published was available in accessible formats.
This is Karen. I'm so with you on that one. I feel like we are, and we need to close out. I have so many more questions I would have loved to ask you. This has just been a fabulous conversation. I cannot thank our panelists, Danielle, John, Ariel, and Jay, enough for their participation. And I'm going to sign off. And I think it's up to Louis next.
Thank you very much. The Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium wants to thank you for joining us for today's workshop. And we hope that we will see you in 2022 at our future events. And as we wrap things up, I wanted to mention a few things that are on this slide. One that is not on this slide is to let you know that the consortium is currently recruiting for new board members. And our deadline to receive applications is this coming Friday at 5 o'clock. You can get more information about doing that on our website. As far as what's on this slide, I do want to let you know that this recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and that in addition to a link that was just provided in the chat, a survey will be sent out to you by email. We'd love to have you fill it out and give us feedback on this workshop. The rest of the slide provides a number of links, and you have access to this information on the PowerPoint that was mailed out to you in the last couple of days, or you can see it on the recording if you watch that. But the links that are provided are a link to our Facebook page, and we would love to have you like us on Facebook. A link is also provided to our YouTube channel, and it would be great to have you subscribe to our channel. A link is also provided to our website. And once again, we've provided a link to where you can make a donation. Thank you again for joining us for today's workshop, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.